What would make Borderlands 4 the perfect Borderlands game? Clearly, each of the Borderlands games do several things very well. For Borderlands 1, it was setting the tone, developing Borderlands' style, and creating hilarious enemies like General Knox that paved the way for Borderlands 2, which absolutely nailed the main villain and improved upon in-game content, launching with 2 raid bosses and then adding more with each DLC. Then the pre-sequel came along, and even though it lacked in-game, it delivered one of the best DLCs in the franchise's history with the Clamptastic Voyage, and it gave us some of the best skill trees of the franchise. Fast forward to Borderlands 3, and despite the story flaws, it has the best overall gameplay, gear, builds, and in-game diversity in the series. And then there's Wonderlands. Wonderlands, in my opinion, does several things very, very well. Story, gameplay, level design, but the concept of loot luck as the means to get dedicated drops was a huge miss. So I posed a question to you all during my recent Dull Allegiance Modes playthrough, asking what Borderlands 4 needs in order to succeed, and you guys all answered the call beautifully. So this is your top 5 things that Borderlands 4 needs in order to succeed.
Number 5!
Starting us off at number 5 is Pearlescents and other item rarities. In Borderlands 1, pearls were introduced with the General Knox DLC and immediately became a fan favorite thing. Something crazy rare to hunt for, a chase, something to get. Borderlands 2 brought pearls back, but sadly the in-game balancing of Borderlands 2 left most of the pearls feeling very underwhelming. Borderlands 2, however, did introduce Seraph weapons and later on effervescent rarity, which was really cool. Then Borderlands the pre-sequel failed to bring back pearls, but did introduce the glitch rarity, which I would honestly love to see return as well because those guns were fun as hell. Then Borderlands 3 dropped without pearls and sadly never had them added in post-launch for some reason, and now Wonderlands appears to not have learned from Borderlands 3 and also didn't launch with pearls or any other in-game rarities. This one's a true head scratcher for me. Something as simple as hard to get rarity just gets abandoned despite the constant community cry for their return, especially after Borderlands 2 dropped effervescent as a new rarity type 7 years after launch and just before the release of Borderlands 3, which clearly made fans think that new rarities, or at least fun old rarities like Pearlescents, would return. According to Randy Pitchford, the CEO of Gearbox, pearls in Borderlands 3 would have meant cutting an entire weapon manufacturer or class of weapon in order to conform with gun architecture and memory constraints on certain consoles. Read that as old gen. Personally, I'd be fine with them removing green rarity in favor of adding in pearlescent. Green items tend to be replaced easily and aren't even enough of a step up from white items for most of us to even care. So get rid of the greens, bring us the pearls. That's my solution.
Okay, here we are at number 4!
At number 4 is balancing at launch and minimal nerfing post-launch. It's no secret that one of the things that severely damaged the community trust in Borderlands 3 were the early nerfs. Granted, looking back now, those nerfs were ultimately needed for the balance of the game, and the end result is a Borderlands 3 with 4 Vault Hunters all feeling very balanced and strong, but a lot of players felt slighted by those early changes, and I get that. Imagine you discover some sort of crazy interaction with a weapon or a grenade, and you min-max your build to perfect the damage, then the next week your build is nerfed, your grenade is nerfed, or in Flank and Moses' case, your entire character is nerfed. Again, they rebounded from this, but the damage was done. A lot of people abandoned ship just because of these nerfs. Now, granted, Borderlands 2 also nerfed things and did it for quite some time as well, and that was also met with hostility from fans. I remember being mad when they nerfed the B in conference call myself, and I said the exact same thing as all of you guys. It's a PvE game, why nerf anything? But looking back on it, I realized that Borderlands 2 would have died a quick death without balancing. If you can just insta-kill raid bosses, then you get bored. There's no challenge, there's no thrill, there's nothing to it. And when you get bored, you move on and you play a completely different game. So I get it, but I hope that they take their time and work out the balancing issues pre-launch for Borderlands 4.
Number 3!
At number 3 is story and villain. One of the major complaints about Borderlands 3 was the story. That's no big surprise to anybody watching this video. Specifically, though, that the twins were a huge letdown compared to Jack. But it's not just the main villains. Parts of Borderlands 3 drug on for far too long. I'm looking at you, Eden 6. But looking back at previous titles, every Borderlands game has some story issues, even Borderlands 2, whether you believe it or not. The pre-sequel basically had to retcon the entire backstory in for most of the events of Borderlands 2 to actually have Borderlands 2 make any any level of sense. But when I think about video game stories, I don't really need them to be amazing. Frankly, I love the story playthrough on Borderlands 2 because it constantly pushes the action forward. That's the main thing for me in video game stories. It has to push the action forward. Also, Jack's banter, while hilarious, also feels threatening in a way that the Calypso twins in Borderlands 3 never achieved despite what they did to both Lilith and Maya. Wonderlands did a good job of having the story be entertaining and pushing the action forward, with the exception of meeting the Wastard and traversing that godforsaken map. The Dragon Lord is, in my opinion, the second best villain of the entire franchise, right behind Jack. He's ominous, he's menacing, he's also hilarious. So to sum it all up, Borderlands 4 needs a story that's closer to Borderlands 2 and Wonderlands, cutting the slow sections and keeping the pace moving forward. I'm okay with a shorter story. All these people out there are calling for 18-hour stories. That's the problem. We don't need an 18-hour long story. We need like a 12-hour long story, tops. You want to get through the story and start playing the game. The story is there for those people that just play the story and leave. The rest of us, we want to actually play the game. A villain or villains that we love to hate is required, high stakes, but with traditional Borderlands dark humor sprinkled in.
Number 2.
And number 2 is dedicated drops in farmable respawning enemies. Technically, this answer tied with number 1, and in some ways I feel like that's because they're sort of intertwined. In every Borderlands game, we have some level of dedicated drop farming, and for those of you guys that aren't familiar with what that means, a dedicated drop is a legendary or unique item that drops more often from a particular named enemy. For example, in Borderlands 2, we have the Unkempt Herald that can drop from Savage Lee at a 10% drop rate. Or in Borderlands 3, we have Road Dogg, who has 3 dedicated drops: the Hellwalker, the Splattergun artifact, and the Redline shotgun. Now, Road Dogg has a 30% chance to drop one of those 3 items, essentially making it a 10% chance for each of those things to drop. Some dedicated drops can also world drop, meaning you can get them randomly from enemies, chests, and vending machines, but you have a much higher likelihood of obtaining it from its dedicated source. And that's something we've had to a degree in every single Borderlands game to this point. Now, Wonderlands has some dedicated drop sources, but the problem is they attach loot luck to dedicated drops and not just world drops. So in order to truly farm dedicated drops with a reasonable rate, you need to be max level, you need to complete the loot luck shrine, and you need to do some chaos chamber progression. This problem could be alleviated by simply making named enemies respawn on their various maps and moving some of the drops around, because enemies like the Chance have 3 dedicated drops in their pool, meaning that even with maximum loot luck, your odds of farming a dedicated drop from him is about 6%. This is very much a step backward for dedicated farming from Borderlands 2 and 3.
Honorable mention.
There are several honorable mentions for this video, and there's probably more things that I could list than I would ever be able to fit into one video, but these are some of the more popular answers that you guys gave to me. More playable characters. Borderlands 2 launched with 4 Vault Hunters and then added in Gage and Krieg via DLCs. Borderlands the pre-sequel also launched with 4 characters and then added 2 via DLC. In both of these instances, the DLC characters became fan favorites. I know that the numbers that Gearbox has shows that most players stuck with just 1 character on Borderlands 2. I get that. Developing and voicing extra characters is a time and resource that could be spent making more in-game content. But Borderlands 3 is an example of why those extra classes could have been an amazing addition. Don't get me wrong, Borderlands 3 with the addition of the 4th skill tree via the designer's cut added massive build diversity for the existing classes, but having 2 more class options with uniquely different playstyles to the 4 that we have would have been amazing. Including them as part of Season Pass 2 and then charging the same price as Season Pass 1 would have been huge for the game. Some of the other popular picks include preset loadouts, map reset to farm bosses without saving and quitting, dialogue skip and cutscene skip at launch, enemy scaling with you at all times just like in Wonderlands, an expansion of the Crazy Earl veteran rewards machine to include all mission rewards including DLC rewards, weighted ammo drops is another big one that everybody wants, where the game actually gives you ammo for the things that you need when you open up ammo chests, and finally a new game plus just like Borderlands 3 does, where it's completely optional.
Number 1.
And finally, at number 1, Endgame, including better DLCs. This one's a no-brainer. One of the things that most people think of when you mention Borderlands games is the endgame content. You got Cromrax in the armory on Borderlands 1, Terramorphous, Vermivorous, Digistruct Peak, and various raid bosses added with DLC in Borderlands 2. In Borderlands 3, there are now 17 raid-level enemies scattered across the content, with most of them being included in the base game. Borderlands 3 also introduced the concept of takedowns, which are long-form raids along the lines of Destiny, but without requiring multiple multiplayer to do them. Borderlands 3 also introduced the Proving Grounds, which aren't the toughest content, but are a good way to test how fast you can complete the challenge, and also a great way to get some guaranteed legendary loot at the end. And after saying all that, we come to Wonderlands. Now, Wonderlands had a great concept with the Chaos Chambers. Playing those with friends was amazing. It was actually some of the most fun that I've had playing with other people in a long time. It was challenging, fast-paced, and you didn't need to save and quit when playing with a group. The bunnies at the end is a cool way to target farm for items as well, but the problem comes when that's the only in-game content. It would be like if Borderlands 2 had no raid bosses or substantial DLC story content and instead only had Digistruct Peak, or if Borderlands 3 had nothing other than the 6 Proving Grounds over and over. Sure, the Chaos Chambers offers some degree of variety, and that gets expanded upon with each DLC mirror content and their bosses, but it lacks the true variety of content like we got with Borderlands 3 by the end of its multi-year lifespan. And that's a shame because Wonderlands has the best overall gameplay of the franchise. It features some of the most beautiful maps, has some amazing boss fights, but without takedowns, raid bosses, slaughter maps, proving grounds, or something of that sort, players lose interest. Ultimately, if Gearbox takes every item on this list and adds it for Borderlands 4, then they could truly deliver a masterpiece. I just hope that they stick the landing. Let me know in the comment section down below, what do you guys think is the most crucial thing that Gearbox needs to add in Borderlands 4 to make it the best game in the franchise? If you enjoyed this video, then please take a second to hit that like button, subscribe for more Borderlands content, and I will see you guys in the next one. Take care.